I still remember the scent of white lilies that morning. It used to be my favorite. But that day it made me sick. Because that was the scent that filled the room when I found out the man I was supposed to marry, the Duke everyone adored, had betrayed me. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth, delivered in a single trembling whisper by someone who couldn't stand to watch me walk into a lie before I take you into that moment, into the quiet collapse of a woman who thought she'd already found forever. Please, take a deep breath with me, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever been broken right before you were meant to be happiest, stay with me till the end, because what I did next changed everything. And I promise, you'll never forget it now. Let's begin. I met Alexander, the Duke of Ravenshire, in the most unexpected way, under the old elm tree behind the orphanage where I volunteered. He was charming, soft-spoken, with the kind of smile that could melt years of loneliness. I was a commoner, an artist who sold her paintings to survive, and yet, somehow, he saw me, or at least, I thought he did. He said my hands reminded him of freedom, that every brushstroke I made was like a rebellion against the world's expectations. He said he envied my courage. It sounds foolish now, doesn't it? The way we cling to words when they sound like love. For a year, I believed him. I believed the stolen glances, the secret letters, the soft touches hidden behind palace walls. I believed in the fairy tale, a duke who defied his title for love, until, the morning before the wedding, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my window. The dress hung by the mirror, layers of silk and lace shimmering in the gray light. It should have been the happiest day of my life, but something in the air felt wrong. Then came the knock. It was Clara, one of the maids. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling as she held out a small box. "My lady," she whispered, you need to see this before it's too late." Inside was a letter, sealed with the Ravenshire crest. Not addressed to me, addressed to her, Lady Evangeline. The name hit me like a dagger. She was his childhood friend. The one he once said was, like a sister. The letter was love. Every word written with tenderness that I had once believed was meant for me. Promises of a future, plans to meet after the wedding. He wrote that marrying me was duty, but she was his heart. My knees gave way before I could even cry. My world, my belief, my love, shattered in an instant. I sat there, clutching the letter, watching the rain trace down the window like tears I couldn't shed yet. My heart wanted to scream, my body wanted to run, but my soul, it went silent. Hours before the wedding, I realized I wasn't the bride of love. I was the bride of convenience, a crown for his reputation. I don't remember how long I sat there, but when I finally stood, I wasn't the same woman anymore. Something inside me, something soft and foolish, had died. I went to the mirror and looked at myself. The gown still hung there, untouched. My reflection looked ghostly pale, but my eyes, they were no longer afraid. I took the letter, folded it, and placed it in the bouquet that was meant to be carried down the aisle. Then, I put on the dress. I walked into the ceremony like nothing was wrong. The hall was filled with nobles, musicians, laughter. Everything glittered like a dream. Alexander stood there waiting for me, smiling like a man who thought he had the world in his hands. And for a moment, I almost pitied him. When I reached the altar, the priest began his words. My heart was calm, too calm. I felt like a storm about to break. When it came time for my vows, I looked up at Alexander and said softly, "My lord, before I promise my life to you, I want to give you something." I handed him the bouquet. He smiled, confused, until he saw it, the folded letter peeking through the flowers. The color drained from his face. The silence that fell across the hall was heavy enough to break bones. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply whispered, "I thought love was supposed to make you brave, but I see now, you only needed me to make you look honorable." Then I turned and walked away. People gasped, whispered, some even called out my name, but I didn't stop. My shoes echoed through the marble hall, each step a heartbeat toward freedom. I left behind the crown, the title, the shame. I left behind the woman who thought she wasn't enough. That night, I sat by the window of my small cottage, the rain still falling outside, and I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was finally real. Pain has a way of sculpting us, doesn't it? It chisels away everything false until only truth remains. Days turned into months. I poured my heartbreak into my art. Every stroke of my brush was a scar transformed into beauty. My paintings began to sell, first in the village, then in the city, until nobles themselves sought my work, ironically. Even the Duchess of Ravenshire, yes, Evangeline, commissioned me once, unaware that the artist who painted her portrait was the woman her husband once betrayed. When she came to my studio, she tried to hide her sadness, but her eyes told a story of regret. And when she saw my name signed beneath the painting, her hand trembled. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge ever could. Years later, Alexander came to see me. No title, no glory, just a man worn down by choices that hollowed him out. He stood in my gallery, surrounded by paintings that whispered pieces of my soul. He said my name softly, like it still meant something. "I've never stopped thinking about you," he said. I looked at him, really looked, and realized I felt nothing. "Neither have I replied gently. "But the woman you knew doesn't exist anymore." He smiled sadly. "You've become everything I once dreamed of having," I nodded. "And everything you were too afraid to stand beside." He left that day with his head bowed, and for the first time, I felt free. Not from him, but from the need to be understood. Sometimes betrayal is the beginning of the most beautiful kind of freedom, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for an apology. So yes, I discovered the Duke betrayed me hours before the wedding, and what I did next, walking away, choosing myself, rebuilding from the ashes, didn't just stun everyone. It saved me, and maybe, if you're listening to this right now, it can save you too. Because you are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to rise from. The morning after I walked away from the wedding, the world felt eerily quiet. You'd think I would have felt grief, but all I felt was stillness. The kind that comes after a storm has ripped everything apart, and all that's left are broken branches and silence. I sat by the window, watching the sun slowly rise, and for the first time in years, I didn't know who I was anymore. Not the future Duchess, not the fiancé, not the girl in love, just a woman stripped of everything that once defined her. But maybe that's where true beginnings hide, in the emptiness left behind by endings. People talked, of course. They always do. They said I was foolish for walking away from a duke, that I'd ruined my only chance at a grand life, that I'd embarrassed his family. But they didn't know what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you love so deeply that your heartbeat once depended on their smile. They didn't know what it felt like to hold a letter that proved everything you believed and was a lie. In those early days, I avoided mirrors. I couldn't bear to see the reflection of a woman who had loved too blindly, trusted too easily. My mother used to say, "Sometimes heartbreak is the only way God teaches us who we truly are." At the time, I thought it was just a way to make pain sound poetic. But later, I understood. I left the city soon after. I sold my jewelry, the ones Alexander had given me, and bought a small cottage by the sea. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt something close to peace. The days passed quietly. I painted from dawn to dusk. Portraits, seascapes, memories turned into colors. I poured every ounce of pain into the canvas until it became something beautiful. People began to notice. A noble woman traveling through the coast saw my paintings and bought one, then another. Then she introduced me to her friends. Soon, word spread about the mysterious woman by the sea whose art felt alive, whose colors carried secrets. They didn't know the secret was me. One afternoon, as I was cleaning my brushes, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, a young messenger stood there, holding a letter sealed with the royal crest. My heart skipped. I hadn't seen that seal since the day I'd walked away. The letter was from Lady Evangeline, the woman who had once been my friend, and the woman he had chosen over me. She wrote that she wished to see me, that she admired my art, that she hoped I'd consider painting her portrait. I almost laughed. Of all people, her? But curiosity is a strange thing. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When she arrived, she was still beautiful, perhaps even more than before, but there was a heaviness in her eyes, the kind that comes from carrying regrets too long. As she sat for the portrait, she spoke softly, trying to fill the silence between us. She told me about her life as the Duchess, the endless formalities, the cold dinners, the way Alexander had grown distant. "He doesn't look at me the way he used to," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if he ever loved me at all." I kept painting, my brush steady, my face calm. But inside, I could feel the universe weaving its quiet justice. When the portrait was finished, she stood before it, and for a long time she didn't say a word. Then she turned to me, her voice trembling. "Your work, it feels like it sees straight into my soul." "It does," I replied softly, "because I've been there." That night, after she left, I stood by the sea and watched the waves crash against the rocks. I realized something then. Revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in silence, in grace, in the quiet power of rising above what tried to destroy you. Months passed. My art flourished. I began receiving invitations from galleries in the capital. My name, the name once whispered with pity, was now spoken with admiration. And then, one day, Alexander himself appeared at one of my exhibitions. I recognized him instantly, though time had changed him. His once proud eyes looked weary. His posture no longer carried the arrogance of a duke, but the humility of a man who'd lost something precious. He stood before one of my paintings, a woman walking away from a burning castle, and whispered, "You always had a gift for truth." I turned to him, calm. "Truth is all I have left," he smiled faintly. "I thought I had everything, but the day you walked away, I realized I had nothing. For a moment I saw the man I once loved, broken, remorseful, human. And though part of me wanted to hate him forever, another part felt, peace. You chose her, I said gently. He nodded, and I paid for it every day. He told me that Evangeline had left him, that their love had withered under the weight of lies, that the estate was struggling, and then he said something that caught me completely off guard. I came to ask for forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because I can't live without knowing if you ever found happiness. I looked at him, this man who had once been my entire world, and smiled softly. "I did," I said, "but not the kind you could give me." He lowered his head, tears glinting in his eyes. "I see that now." That night after he left, I sat alone in the empty gallery. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anger, just gratitude, because every heartbreak, every betrayal, every cruel twist of fate had led me to this moment, standing tall, unshaken, and whole. The next morning, I received an invitation to present my work at the royal palace. The king himself had taken notice. They wanted me, the girl who was once almost a duchess, to become the official court artist. As I walked through those gilded halls again, I realized something almost poetic. I had once been meant to walk those halls as someone's wife. Now, I walked them as my own name, my own power, my own story. People whispered, of course, they always do. But this time the whispers weren't pity, they were awe, and somewhere, in the crowd, I saw him again. Alexander. Standing quietly, watching me from afar, our eyes met for a brief moment, and he smiled, a sad, knowing smile, before turning away. And I knew that was the last time I'd ever see him, because the woman he once knew had turned her pain into legacy. I used to think that closure meant hearing, "I'm sorry," but as the years went by, I realized closure is not something someone gives you. It's something you find in the silence they leave behind. After the exhibition at the Royal Palace, life became something I'd never imagined for myself. My paintings traveled across cities, from London to Vienna, from Paris to Rome. They said my work carried emotion so raw that people cried standing in front of it. They didn't know those tears were once mine. One evening, I received a letter embossed with the royal seal again. This time it wasn't just an invitation, it was an honor. The Queen herself wished to commission a portrait for the royal family. When I arrived at the palace, the halls looked the same. The chandeliers still glowed like frozen stars, and the marble floors still reflected perfection. But I was different. I was no longer the girl who had once waited there in a wedding gown. I was a woman who had walked through ruin and turned it into art. As I stood before the Queen, she smiled. "They say your paintings capture the truth behind people's eyes," she said softly. I bowed. "Your Majesty, I only paint what the soul refuses to hide." Days turned into weeks as I worked on that portrait. And then, one morning, the Queen's lady-in-waiting entered the room with an unexpected visitor. Alexander. He looked older now, his once dark hair touched with gray, his expression heavy with something that resembled quiet sorrow. "I didn't know you were here," I said. "My tone even, I didn't either," he murmured. "I handle some of the royal estate's finances now. Seems life has a strange way of bringing circles to a close." We stood there for a long moment. Neither of us spoke. The air between us was full of everything we didn't say years ago. Then he looked at the painting, at the Queen's gentle face, at the depth of her eyes, at the serenity I had managed to capture. "You've done it," he whispered. "You've built a life that doesn't need anyone to complete it." And I realized he was right. When I finished that portrait, the Queen gifted me a small piece of land on the edge of her estate. "For inspiration," she said. I used it to open an art academy, a place where women could learn to paint, to dream, to rise. I watched girls walk through those doors, timid, uncertain, afraid to take up space, and I saw pieces of my younger self in each of them. Every time I guided their brushstrokes, every time I watched their eyes light up with pride, it felt like I was painting my own healing all over again. Sometimes, I would still receive letters from people in the city, nobles, collectors, even old acquaintances. One of them came from Alexander. He wrote, "I've left the estate. I live quietly now, near the sea, not far from where you once did. I often walk by the cliffs and think about how differently things could have been if I had listened instead of judged. You were my greatest loss. I know that now." I folded the letter gently and placed it inside the drawer of my writing desk. Not to keep the memory alive, but to remind myself how far I had come. Because love had once broken me. But purpose rebuilt me. Years passed. My academy flourished, and one summer morning, as I sat with my students under the open sky, one of them asked me, "Lady Eleanor, do you ever miss him?" I looked at her innocence, her curiosity, and smiled softly. "I don't miss him," I said. "I miss who I was when I believed love was supposed to save me. But now, I understand it was meant to shape me." She didn't understand it fully. Not yet. But one day she would. That evening, I stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The golden light of dusk washed over everything, and in that moment, I felt a quiet contentment, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone's presence. I thought about that girl who once stood in a gown of white lace, waiting for a man who betrayed her. And then I thought about the woman I had become, strong, whole, unshaken. Pain had once been my prison. But now, it was my paintbrush. People often think revenge is loud, dramatic, fiery. But the sweetest revenge is peace. To wake up one morning and realize the person who broke you no longer has the power to touch a single part of your soul. A few years later, I received one final letter. From the royal court. Alexander had passed away. The duke who once ruled over estates and hearts was gone. They found one of my paintings in his private chambers, the one I had painted long ago of the woman walking away from the burning castle. Beneath it, he had written in his own hand, "I should have followed her." For a moment, I closed my eyes. Not in sadness, but in acceptance. Because that's the thing about life. It always balances its own scales. I walked out to the garden and watched the horizon fade into twilight. The breeze carried the scent of sea salt and roses, familiar, comforting. And as I stood there, I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for teaching me how to lose beautifully, because in truth I didn't lose at all. I simply found myself, and sometimes that's the most magnificent victory of all."